Joe Mandelbaum said, this is the second of 5 lectures. We had about the same attendance the first one. We're hoping to have it more this time, but I understand it's a staff meeting that's scheduled against this. I hope that doesn't happen next time. I'm going to talk about connections and parallels regarding the Dybbuk, and also background. And we'll play a couple of excerpts, and later we'll hear some excerpts being sung. And then I'm going to invite 2 composers who are here, who have written full-length operas about the Dybbuk, to come up and talk about them. Now, Dybbuk is a Yiddish word derived from Hebrew. The Hebrew root, the letters DYBUK, means to adhere or to cling. The word is actually an abbreviation of Dybbuk meruach ra'ah, which is the cleavage of an evil spirit, or Dybbuk min ha'hionim, Dybbuk from outside, which is found in that. And the root, as I say, means to cling or to stick. So something that sticks to you, clings to you, is the root of this word. And it started appearing in the 16th century. It was suggested that a sloppily made mezuzah, or entertaining doubts about Moses' crossing of the Red Sea, opened one's household to Dybbuk possession. Yoel Teitelbaum, the Satmar Rebbe, 1887 to 1979, advocated psychiatry as a cure. In psychological literature, the Dybbuk has been described as an hysterical syndrome. Now, the play, the Dybbuk, was written by a very interesting character named S.Ansky. That wasn't his real name. His birth name was Rappaport. So you see, do you remember his full name? I have it here somewhere. Here it is, Shloime Zeindel Rappaport. And he wrote mostly works in Russian until 1904. After the 1905 revolution, he got really interested in Jewish things, and he organized or was the main person in an expedition to find Jewish folklore in the Pale settlement. So he was a folklorist, and he began writing in Yiddish, but the play, the Dybbuk, was in fact originally written in Russian. And the title was Dybbuk меж двух миров, Between Two Worlds. That version was submitted to the censor and lost for many years. It was finally found fairly recently in Russia. And I don't think that original Russian version was ever produced. There was a Yiddish version that Ansky himself wrote and brought to the Vilna Truppe, and they finally staged it in Warsaw in 1920, exactly a month after his death. He went to Vilna to try to get it done, and actually he lost, it's quite a story, he lost the manuscript. And in the meantime, Chaim Nachman Bialik, a great Hebraist in Russia, had translated it into Hebrew. And the story is that Ansky took Bialik's Hebrew version and reconstructed his own Yiddish version from it. That's one story. Another story is that he found another version and rewrote it. But at any rate, it was done by the Vilna Truppe in Warsaw, all over Europe. And the Habima Theater in Moscow staged it in 1922 in Hebrew. And then it was done in Palestine. Now, Between Two Worlds is something I want to explore because it's relevant to so many things that we've talked about in this lecture series. Last time I told you about how Bernard Malamud, who married an Italian Catholic, considered himself kind of between two worlds. Many of his stories explore the intersection between Judaism and Christianity. There was a brilliant film that I saw just this week that I want to recommend to all of you, called Le Métis des Dieux, Le Métis Fils de Dieu, which is about the Archbishop of Paris, Cardinal Lustiger, or Lustiger as they pronounce it in French, who was a Jew and a Christian and wanted to be considered both at the same time. And as you know, this series is dedicated to the memory of my mother, Helene Lehrman, who died on January 13th, and who considered herself a product of two cultures, Russian and American. There's also a kind of a parallel here because, as I mentioned, the first performance of Ansky's play took place as a memorial to him, a month after he died. And one of the things that my mother did was translate Russian operas with me. One of those operas, RUSALKA, by DYBUK, has never been done in this country. And we translated it almost 30 years ago. And it's going to be performed, thanks to Joe Mandelbaum, at Queen's College on November 22nd in her memory. So that's another parallel. There is a parallel also between the Dybbuk and this very opera, RUSALKA, because both of them are about the otherworldly destruction of a wedding. Don't raise your eyebrows, it really is true. In RUSALKA, the daughter of a miller is in love with a prince. She becomes pregnant by him. The prince says he's very sorry, but he has to marry the princess, gives the miller a bag of money. She throws herself into the Dnieper River, and when she wakes up, she becomes a mermaid. And the prince's wedding to the princess is destroyed, and his marriage to her is destroyed by the spirit of the mermaid coming to the wedding and disrupting it. It's 1857, okay? In the Dybbuk, which is 1913 to 1920, you've got the daughter, Leah, the daughter of Reb Sender, who, even before she was born, was betrothed to the son of a friend of his, but then that betrothal was forgotten. The young man, Hanan, grows up, falls in love with her, and she with him, but they're not to marry because Reb Sender wants a rich suitor for his daughter, and he finds him. In the meantime, Hanan explores the Kabbalah and the secret mysteries and dies while praying to these evil spirits, and then comes back as an evil spirit to destroy the wedding. You see the parallel? So, a Dybbuk can be an evil spirit. It can also be a spirit that has come back to right a wrong, or to fulfill something which was unfulfilled. And that's why I mentioned to you last time that Leonard Bernstein called me Martinstein's Dybbuk, because I've found so many riches in his work and then brought them to life through the help of many people in this room, as a matter of fact. Now, there are these connections, these parallels, this duality of pride and shame in the play. The author, Ansky, was a member of the Haskalah and the Enlightenment, but the Dybbuk is not about enlightened people, it's about backward people in the provinces who believe in evil spirits. And although the consensus today seems to be that the dramatic representations of the Dybbuk are the pride and joy of Jewish tradition, there was quite a lot of debate. In fact, there was a five-day-long debate in Israel called the Dybbuk debate about whether it was good for the Jews or not. Because it represented the backward provincial and mythological and evil spirits rather than the enlightened striving for rights and liberties. Yeah, here we go. The Dybbuk could be the soul of one who dies unfulfilled and then wanders in search of a new vessel. That's one of the definitions. Okay, where does the Dybbuk take place and when? It takes place usually in the town called Breinitz, or Brinitz, which I haven't been able to find on the map. Have you? Joe? Jerry? No?
It was, and not far from Mirapol.
Not far from Mirapol, yes. Well, Mirapol's a real place. As a matter of fact, it's probably the home of the ancestor of Abel Mirapol, who adopted the Rosenberg sons. Mirapol was a real place, and there were a famous rabbi there. But exactly where this Breinitz is not clear. And it was also the timing is not clear, but there is a reference to a recently departed rabbi, where is this now? Yes, the death of David of Talmud, said to be of blessed memory in 1882. So probably it takes place a little bit after 1882 in the Pale Settlement near Mirapol. That's where we've been able to locate. However, there's also a holy grave that figures in the story, in the cemetery of Brinitz, the resting place of a bride and groom killed under their wedding canopy when the evil Chmiel, I think that's Chmielnicki, raided the area, and my source says that was 1648. So that's quite a time before the alleged time of the plot. Now, there's also a parallel here. We have two composers here, Joel Mandelbaum and Gerald Morgulas, who both attended Lincoln High School together, 2 years apart, and were both drawn, or each drawn, to music and the law. Gerald Morgulas is a lawyer who has also written a number of operas. Joel Mandelbaum is a composer, professor at Queens College, who's written a number of operas, and who almost went to law school, I just learned. In fact, it was the writing of one of his operas that so absorbed him that made him decide not to go to law school. But there are parallels here, obviously. And each of them wrote an opera based on the Dybbuk. There are also connections and parallels between a colleague of Joel's, whom I knew slightly, but he knew very well, Hugo Weisgall, who recommended an opera on the Dybbuk be done in Chicago, and we're going to explore some of that opera because it's a really brilliant opera by a protege of his named Shulamit Ram, a contemporary of mine from Israel, and her librettist, Charles Kondek. Charles Kondek, I say without hesitation, is the most brilliant living librettist that I know. He lives up in Hudson, New York, near Albany, and he had a car accident, doesn't drive anymore, so he rarely comes to New York. I invited him to this series. I was hoping he could come because we're going to be talking about him in almost every lecture. He's written that many wonderful opera librettos for Weisgall, for Ron, and for Gerald Cohen. And I did contact him about this and talk with him, and he said, well, actually, there's a fourth libretto that he's just written for Shulamit Ram on the Diary of Anne Frank, which is going to be done at Indiana University next year and at the Atlanta Opera the following year. Now, I want to talk a little bit, before we get into the other books, I just want to talk a little bit about Gerald Morgulas, whom I have known since the 1970s. It was his company, or he was on the board of the company, the Bel Canto Opera Company, that produced my first two operas, The Tales of Malamud, which we talked about last time. The first one, completion, Mark Blitzstein said it first, the second one, Carlo. The year after that, in 1979, that company commissioned the first English language production of the first Russian opera, Kalinka Life of the Tsar, and it was done in 1979 by the Belcanto Opera Company. And it was 5 years later that my mother and I approached Jerry and the company about doing DYBUK and RUSALKA. And that's when we did it, but as I say, it's finally going to be produced only this coming November. In 1986, I was working on a piece about a woman named Emma Goldman, who, there was a recent book about her by Vivian Gornick, and one of the reviewers said, Emma Goldman harbored from childhood a Dybbuk of defiance. So there's another connection. I was working on this piece about this Russian-American Jewish feminist Dybbuk, Emma Goldman, and we did a little bit of it in Berlin, and I brought it to New York, and Gerald Morgulas had set up a workshop at NYU called The Shop, in which we got to try out and rehearse and work on that piece. And we decided we needed to expand the pool of talent that we knew just personally. So we put an ad in Backstage magazine, and responding to that ad were quite a few wonderful singers. And one of them came in and, as I like to say, walked off with the part, and the composer, and she's here today, that's Helene Williams, my wife. So I have Jerry to thank for that, too. And in 1988, I think one of the very last productions of the Belcanto opera was Chevalier's L'Étoile, which they had me translate and direct. And as a result of that, the Bronx Opera Company, which Helene co-founded with her husband, her first husband, in 1967.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, they produced another Chevalier opera, which they commissioned me to translate as a result of the experience with Belcanto in 2006. That was Le Duc Manqué, 2006. And 2 years ago, at a Russian opera concert series in Long Island, Helene's son sang the first aria from that first scene of Rusalka. So there are all these connections. Now, one other connection I want to mention, though, is in 1990, I was invited by the National Music Theater Network to evaluate, of all things, the Dybbuk by Gerald Morgulas. And I have that evaluation here. I also have the full score that's been improved since then. At the time, I said that it had a strong, continuous plot. It was adaptable for a small house, and Joe's promise: basic work needed. Lyrics are set well enough to be usually sufficiently intelligible. Musically, is generally appropriate. Strongly reminiscent of Puccini, Leone, some S.Ansky, Rimsky-Korsakov. Perhaps the latter two are inevitable with this subject matter. Leonard Bernstein, too, was accused of borrowing from them in his Dybbuk. Music is consistent, and there were some very fine lyrical moments. And we're going to hear some of those